CEO's time is obviously important. It's a constrained resource. It's a finite resource. It should be used like any other resource as effectively as possible on behalf of the company and the customers. Where should that be? And for me, the two biggest pulls have kind of been internal, external, right? And maybe everybody feels that. But do I spend more time out in the marketplace where I think there's a natural pull to the CEO role? I think there's a natural, you said it earlier, customers maybe aim for that, prospects aim for that. And there's sort of a need to worry about competition and things that pull you out there. But you've got a fast-growing company. How much do you need to make sure everything's getting done internally? And I feel like personally, I have more pinballed between those than I have found the balance.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest-growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? Empowering those around you is a big part of leadership. In fact, when I look at all of the different skills of leadership, empowering others and the skills that go along with that, letting their ideas come through, letting them make decisions, it is the cornerstone of you creating a successful relationship with those around you. Today, we're going to talk about empowering others in our series on optimizing your time. But we're also going to talk about some of the other aspects in part 2 with today's guest, which is CEO of Avalon Health Systems, Bill Kerr. Bill is someone that I admire for what they're doing and how he's been able to rise to the occasion of being a true CEO. We look at the journey from going from the guy who has an idea wearing many hats to one who is truly trying to create more of that real CEO relationship with the company, but also some of the struggles that go along with it. When you think about your own journey for leadership, make sure you keep in mind that it is a journey. It's not something that you get all right. It's very iterative. It builds on each other. You will go down the path that will take you down to failures, but you will also be able to see from those failures and rise and move forward together. Now, in Optimizing Your Time series, it is very different from a regular interview. The first part of it is a regular interview style about what's really changed the needle for him and optimize his own time. But in part 2, we look at what he's trying to improve as the CEO of this company. So here's the interview with Bill. Hey, Bill, how are you?
I'm doing great, Gene. How are you today?
Fantastic. Glad to have you back on the podcast.
It's great to be back. I appreciate the opportunity.
When you and I have talked before, we talked about leadership and culture, but we're going to actually take a little bit different approach this time. This is in the Optimize Your Time series. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you've done to improve your time and spend your energy on the most valuable work of the company. So let's go ahead and tell our audience, what is Avalon Health Services?
We're a lab benefit manager. We organize all the laboratory testing and policies around coverage and reimbursement on behalf of health plans. So for instance, Blue Cross Blue Shield plans are our customers and other health plans. So we're an outsourced vendor for them.
Well, I appreciate that. And you have, are you technically the CEO or founder?
I'm the co-founder and the CEO.
When you think about optimizing your time, before we jump into the number one strategy, what was it like before you truly have started to get your time optimized? Or when do you know it's kind of out of whack?
Well, you've been through this, so the interesting thing about starting a company is you wear every hat in the company on day one, right? I mean, you're just it. And the way I have thought about growing the company over time is that I slowly take hats off by hiring somebody to take on that function, right? And so the first few hats I took off are those I'm least skilled to do, like a CFO and an IT person and things like that. But during those phases, there is so much on your plate. It's a matter, I would argue it's a matter of prioritization and survival instead of optimizing. I don't think there's a chance early on to optimize. What I found interesting is as you slowly take some of those hats off, you start to realize you now have, or at least I started to realize I now have some capacity to pick and choose where to invest my time. And that's when I started trying to think about what to do differently. But really, you have to get there at some point. I didn't start off in the capacity to do that. I really started off just survival mode and getting everything done that had to.
Well, I can tell you when I was the CEO of a company that was going fast, I felt more like a firefighter than what I thought a CEO felt like.
That is exactly right. I would agree with that. In fact, I would argue that I only over the past few years have felt like a quote true CEO who's managing the business, because early on, as you know, you're the doer. You're not the manager. You're as much the doer. And like you said, you're a firefighter.
When you had shared with our team the number one strategy that has really helped you optimize your time now, do you remember what you shared with us?
Yes, I really try to decide what is a CEO level decision, or more importantly, I just quit making decisions and quit allowing decisions to be brought to me that I used to make. And that has helped not only me, but honestly, it helped the team too. Giving up decisions is not necessarily a natural act for most of us, right? We've learned to make decisions, and we've been the firefighter, as you know. You're used to making decisions and making them rapidly, and you feel confident in them because you're in command of a lot of information. And so I've decided at some point the only way I was going to get out of those decisions was to refuse to make them. Because I personally feel like, Gene, and I'd be curious as to your opinion, but I feel like any organization, the people inside or even the customers outside, will go to the highest point to which they can get attention. And if you let those decisions come to you, they'll just keep coming. And so the real strategy was quit making decisions and quit allowing decisions to be put on my plate that weren't really worthy of my time.
Well, this is never true or more true than in the sales conversation, because I've been in sales all my life. It's hard to call into a company at the bottom and work your way through the system. If you can start at the top, Bill, then that's where we're supposed to start. But also that's what you described is exactly the kind of evolution that leaders have to go through, is letting others make decisions. You described that to my team as empowering them. Do you think about empowering them specifically?
Yeah, I do. And I'll tell you, it's sort of the natural consequence of realizing I had to stop making them. So, we all hire great people. That's job one, is hire great people, and hire great people for where you're going, not where you are and where you've been, right? That's just almost like 101. But then if you keep making decisions, they're not getting to deliver the skill and talent they have. And so by stepping back and saying, now that you're here, I'm not making those decisions anymore, you are, they naturally feel much more empowered. And in my opinion, much more comfortable making the decisions. I personally feel like in retrospect, as I was bringing on strong people, I didn't clarify that early on, and they weren't sure what decisions they could make. So I think you really do empower them by starting to get yourself out of the fray and out of the middle of their day-to-day work, quite honestly.
Now, I know there's someone out there going, this makes total sense, but you can't give up every decision. So I know there's probably some decisions that you're making at the very top, but is what you really mean is I'm only making a handful of decisions and everyone else is making the rest, or is it something different?
So it's more the latter, but let me clarify. It's a great question. So, let me give you two examples, one simple and obvious, and one maybe hopefully a little bit more nuanced. So one is just like spending decisions. Early on, you're a cash flow negative company, you spend every penny yourself, but eventually you moving into budgets and letting other people make spending decisions is just one method by which you get out of decision making. And I think most people are familiar with budgets, but when a small company growing into a large company pivots from managing spending to managing budgets is an important decision and a way for the CEO to get themselves out of those spending decisions. So that was one evolution that I went through. The second one, and closer to sales that you talked about, is what does have to come to me in terms of commitments the company can make. And so sitting down with the chief growth officer, the COO, and the CFO and saying things that fall within certain guardrails, the three of you, if you're in agreement, you can make that decision. The things I want to know is if you want to go outside these guardrails, and it could be the level of financial risk that's tied to it. It could be the level of investment required, something, but setting up those guardrails so that they could start to make commitments to customers without bringing it to me was a more difficult one, I would say, because I think, like I said earlier, budgets are something most of us are used to, and the concept of time to instill them or install them makes sense. Realizing I had to get out of the way of the customer negotiation and acquisition process was harder for me to get my head around.
I love those examples because the first one is pretty easy. The second one is, I talk about this a lot, is have you established the guardrails? And that's what you're talking about with a CFO or someone that's driving revenue. they should be making these decisions, and feel the confidence that's okay to make the decisions as long as they're within the ranges at which you've agreed to.
Yep, that's exactly right. And I'll share one other thing that they came up with that has worked really well that I would pass on to others. So like anybody, I have a staff meeting once a week. What they decided to do was to have a staff meeting without me once a week as well. And they started using that to make decisions together. Decisions I no longer wanted to make, they started using that to make decisions. And it's actually worked out well as they continue to reach agreement on things. I become more and more a person who gets informed as opposed to the person who gets involved. And so I think they have done a really nice job in using that staff meeting without me to grow their own empowerment further. And that's not only been good for them, but that then lets them delegate decisions to their team as well. And that may be even harder is to get, 2 steps removed when you're somebody who founded a company.
Before we go into part 2, I wanted to kind of recap where we've been in part 1. Empowering others and truly letting them make decisions is a big part of you becoming a stronger leader. You don't want to hire great employees and not give them a chance to make their own decisions, because you won't be able to keep those employees because they want to grow. They want their own confidence and courage muscles to be strengthened in their time of service with you. Your job as a leader is to recognize that and bring out the best in them. And you telling them what to do is actually the antithesis of bringing out the best in them. When you think about your job as a leader, you want to make sure you empower others. The way this gave Bill time was by letting them make these decisions themselves, so he didn't have to be involved. He didn't have to attend all of the meetings. He was able to let the key employees take the reins and make those decisions. Those guardrails become a very important piece to this. Hopefully you picked up on some of the keys that you could be adding in, improving on your own journey of leadership. Now in part 2, we're going to dive into what is he struggling with now? What's really going on in his journey of leadership? Now, I've already recorded this, so you will see a perspective shift in there. You will see something that really allows him to see his problem from a different perspective, which therefore it becomes not so much a problem, but an opportunity to grow the business. I won't tell you exactly what that is because you'll have to tune in to part 2 coming up now. I appreciate you bringing that up because we don't hear this very much. I do hear it with some of my clients is some of the ways that they are empowering their teams, but it's not an extra meeting because there really is some heavy lifting that's going on in there that they are working and collaborating together. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, Bill. I want to take a quick turn right here. The thing that we need to look at is not what's happened in the past, but what do you want to work on? What do you want to improve as it relates to your own time as a CEO?
Well, it's such a good question. So number one is if you scale your time the way I've done some and others have done, I'm sure, optimize it, you create then some capacity for yourself. For the first time in a while, like I said, I have found then the tough thing is, where do you want to invest? CEO's time is obviously important. It's a constrained resource. It's a finite resource. It should be used like any other resource as effectively as possible on behalf of the company and the customers. Where should that be? And for me, the 2 biggest pulls have kind of been internal, external, right? And maybe everybody feels that. But do I spend more time out in the marketplace where I think there's a natural pull to the CEO role? I think there's a natural, you said it earlier, customers maybe aim for that, prospects aim for that. And there's sort of a need to worry about competition and things that pull you out there. But you've got a fast-growing company. How much do you need to make sure everything's getting done internally? And I feel like personally, I have more pinballed between those than I have found the balance. So as I've created capacity, it's been great, but I'm not sure I'm using it as effectively as I could in the balancing act of external growth, internal scaling.
So this is that coaching section of this conversation. So we're going to coach you through this. It's not the traditional interview, but I promise not to make you cry and dive into the deep, dark secrets that define who you are. But with all that being said, I want to ask you, what are you experiencing if you're not getting right now?
I think it's what I'm observing is affecting others. And let me explain that. I feel a little bit like if I pivot to heavy focus on the outside, that gets a lot of attention. to me at least, Gene, there's a little bit of a people perceive things that get attention are the top priorities of the company. And so as I do that to the outside, I perceive that a lot of the people doing all the heavy lifting internally perceive that work's not important. And they feel that pivot away as a negative. And then when I pivot back, there can be a sense of, well, helping the growth team isn't as effective. So I feel like I am not balancing correctly. The need I'm not getting met is that I'm not giving them all some share of attention and importance that reflects how important I do view them to the company. Does that make sense? So if I'm in some ways a reflection back of what's important, I don't feel like I'm balancing that. I'm almost pinballing, and like I think of it as a boat that then tilts because I keep running from one side to the other. And I just don't think that's helpful to the team.
But I want to take us a little bit outside of this current situation to look at balancing. Do you believe that we can balance like our personal and our work lives? Do you believe that's a balancing act, or do you see it a different way?
I believe everyone can strike a balance that makes sense to them. I don't think that's the same balance for everyone.
But it's never. Is it ever really in balance?
I don't know if it's ever really in balance, honestly. The way I crisp on the priorities that I want to get done, both personally and professionally, and then said no to other things.
Yep.
That's when I get closest to feeling like I'm balancing those. But obviously, the demands of each exceed capacity.
The reason I bring this up, Bill, is because I've got a friend of mine, and his name escapes me, but he's written a book on off balance on purpose. And
okay,
the book, I've actually read the book. I've had him on the show before, and I will think of his name in a second. But the way he describes this makes total sense. Like, I'm going to go on vacation in 2 weeks with my family, and I'm going to not be working much at all. Like 2 or 3 phone calls, probably maximum, over the course of a week. That's completely off balance, but it's on purpose.
Right.
Makes sense? This week, because I'm going to go away next week, I've already looked at my schedule and said, you know what, I might not be available for every dinner tonight or this week because I've got to catch up on some stuff so we can go out of town next week. So I'm off balance on purpose. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
The big thing there is I'm not trying to give everyone equal hours. It's a season that we go through. And this is just from 1 week to the next. It could be from one day to the next. What I do believe, though, and this is just from my own personal life, I want to make sure that my family feels that I'm completely connected when I'm there with them. So I'm 100% present in the moments I am there, which means a lot more than being distracted while you're on their time. If that kind of, does all that kind of connect the dots for you?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's starting to resonate on where one could take it in the company, right? Which is there is an undulation. I'm almost envisioning this cycle, right? What you're sort of saying is, look, there's a cycle. And what I need to do is be more aware of where I am in the cycle, and more, I'm going to put words in your mouth, and more conscious about explaining it to people too, right? Because you're sort of explaining to your family, I'm not going to do dinner tonight because we're going to focus next week, right? So you're explaining it. It's anticipatory guidance almost of where the focus is.
It's that old rule of leadership. And I have a lot of my conversations with clients that go to this. It's like, I really wish people would get it. And I ask the question is, what are you doing to set expectations for people to get it? And they're like, oh, I could do a better job with setting expectations. Because Bill, when you were telling me this about the perception is if you focused on.
Yeah, well, and I think honestly, as we sit here and chat about it, I need to do a better job of thinking.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I did not mean to interrupt, Gene. What I was going to say is I'm also feeling like I need to be more conscious in my own thinking around where I am in that cycle. You were talking about communicating it. I think I need to actually develop my own perspective better and then communicate it. I'm not sure I'm as conscious about it as I need to be.
So conscious is the first part of it, and then setting expectations with those around you. Because here's the thing, what you've shared with me so far, Bill, I love the fact that you have a team that's having a staff meeting without you. And if you are using that time, truly pushing the business forward, and this doesn't have to look like you're raising money or signing up a new client. It could be that you're thinking about the innovations in your industry, right? Every CEO I know struggles with creating white space to think about what's the future looks like. But if you're using that time wisely, then you can come back to them and say, you know what, I really appreciate you guys for doing all of this internal work. Your ability to take care of this allows us for me to do this and allows us all to grow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's well said. And I need to use that white space I think I've done a pretty good job of thinking about the corporate priorities, but I think in some ways what we're defining is I'm not doing as good a job about thinking about how my priorities evolve prospectively. I probably would argue, given the problem statement I shared with you and given what you're talking about here, I'd argue that I'm probably being a little bit more reactionary in that, and I need to be a little bit more conscious and prospectively manage my own thinking and then prospectively. So I like the vacation analogy where you know something's coming. I may think about that in terms of corporate milestones. What's the next set of things coming up, and how am I going to be out of balance consciously, correctly?
And so you're no longer trying to keep it in balance and keeping whatever stakeholders are involved aware of this balance. And here's what comes with this struggle of keeping a balance is there's a little guilt that comes with it. Is that fair to say?
That's very fair to say. There's maybe not even a little sometimes.
But the reality now that we're looking at this maybe from a different perspective is it's exactly what you're supposed to be doing, is putting your focus and attention on external at times when internal is being taken care of. It allows you to do that. So that's an absolute wonderful thing to be able to do. And then whenever necessary, you're able to come shift back in. Does all this help you kind of make sense of it?
Yeah, it's interesting. It does, and I apologize, Gene. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. What we're sort of saying, I think, is one, is a luxury to have the time to think about this and even notice that it's a problem. But two, is the next evolution is now use that time more effectively to understand where I need to be out of balance to be most effective. And by doing it that way, then give up some of the baggage that can come by being reactionary, which is some of the guilt and some of the other things.
Does that guilt help you in some way?
Does the guilt help me in some way? Meaning, does it? I don't know. I mean, I guess I could say the guilt might be a barometer that if I paid more attention to it would alert me to whether or not I'm missing something. But today I don't know that I'd say I pay enough attention to that as a barometer as much as I feel it as a stressor, if that makes sense.
Let me take a second here to remind you that if you want to keep getting episodes like this, you want to evolve as a leader, then you want to make sure you go to genehammett.com/subscribe. genehammett.com is my home base. The podcast is Growth Think Tank. And if you want to be a visionary leader, if you want to keep learning from all of these amazing founder CEOs, then go to genehammett.com/subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Can I share with you a personal story about the guilt of something related to this?
Please do.
As we wrap up today's session, I want to kind of just share this personal story because sometimes these helps inside of these coaching relationships. And I have been through pandemic working really hard and I found myself working a lot more hours and meetings are more back to back. And it really does take a drain on me. And so at about 5 or 6 o'clock, when I normally have energy, sometimes I've noticed I don't have as much. And I want to sit down in front of the TV and just kind of zone out and not think about anything. And that came with a lot of guilt. But I started thinking to myself, what if I needed to rest and refresh so that I can go at it again the next day? And would I be willing to let go of that guilt, knowing that I need to recover from something, from the hard work from the day before? And I was able to let go of the guilt because I'm asking myself these internal questions, which is kind of like coaching yourself, if you will. But in this situation, my question is, are you willing to let go of the guilt as it relates to you balancing the time and really try to figure out being more conscious about being off balance on purpose and how that would play out into you being the CEO for the team?
Yeah, that's a great story, by the way, and great advice. I think you're right. I think for me, the way it's probably going to work is not only some introspection on the guilt, but also some more conscious thought about where I need to be out of balance, consciously and effectively and appropriately. Then I think it'll be easier to let go of the guilt because now I know I'm being out of balance appropriately. So I think that's an end point I will get to, but I think it's going to take a little bit of internal coaching, as you pointed out, and also a bit more time using my white space to pay attention to where I need to be out of balance and being aware that that has a consequence and I should just embrace that, not feel guilty about it.
Now, I promise you this would be a pretty good conversation. Has it been helpful to you?
It's been great. Actually, it's been very helpful. I appreciate you taking time to pivot during the conversation.
Sometimes it's the smallest things that we have to address and figure out. Maybe it's having conversations with an external person that helps. So Bill, I really appreciate you being here on the podcast.
Gene, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
I want to take a moment and wrap up today's episode. If you are looking to really push the boundaries and grow as a leader and grow your company, then you want to make sure that you're probably empowering others. I said probably, but I really want to get more specific with that. You really want to empower your team as best you can. You've hired great people, trust them, just like Bill talked about. And part two, we looked at, being off balance on purpose as it relates to how he spends his time externally or internally inside the organization. And the realization, I think, is really powerful. You have to also have the same kind of perspectives to shift in order to grow as a leader. If you have any of those questions, make sure you check out my free resources at genehammett.com. If you want to have a conversation with me, I'm open to getting to know you. If you're a listener this far into the podcast, you're exactly the kind of person I'd love to talk to. So reach out to me, genehammett.com. And when you think of growth and you think of leadership, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.